Mike, the floor is yours, and we'll see you on the other side.
All right. Thank you very much. My name is Mike. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is April 23rd, 1985. For that, I'm grateful. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and share with you today. I I'm always grateful whenever I can be with a group of Alcoholics Anonymous. I get to do that an awful lot, and I'm so very grateful. But it wasn't always that way. So let me tell you a little bit about that. I grew up in an AA home. My dad was an alcoholic. He got sober when I was about 3 years old. So I never saw him drinking. But I did get to, experience some of the things that happen in early recovery. My mother and father having some fights and money issues. There's 7 kids in our family. I'm a middle child. I remember laying in bed and at night when my parents would fight, I would be, probably 6 years old. I'm laying there thinking that it was me that was causing this. And immediately I think I was by default, you know, um, geared towards self-centeredness. Things were about me. I was thinking about me and how I was the cause of that. Uh, Nothing ever became of it, but looking back, I can see some characteristics of self-centeredness that started very, very early. I uh, I lit the house on fire when I was 7. And so I burnt the house down. Didn't go all the way to the ground. They were able to rebuild it. But while this was going on, we lived in a little town outside of Buffalo, New York, called East Aurora. And while this fire was going on, they barricaded the road, and the neighbors are counting the kids. We're all sitting across the street on the porch watching the event unfold. The firefighters chopping the door down, running in with hoses, and I'm just sitting there thinking, there is no way I'm ever telling anybody that I did this. And and I kept that secret. Here I am, like 7 years old, and and I'm afraid, and I've done something wrong, and I'm keeping it a secret. And then I don't. It seemed like months later. It's probably a few weeks tops that I went to my mother, and I got to tell you, my mom was a member of Al-Anon until she passed away not too many years ago with 49 years. Well, I went to her that day, and I remember I was really emotional and worked up, and Mom, I did it. And she said, "You did what?" And I said, "I lit the house on fire." And she said, "Oh, we know that." So that was pretty much the way my secrets went. People kind of knew I wasn't really keeping secrets. I was afraid all the time. I had older brothers, and my older brothers in New York State at this time, you could drink at age 18 legally. So my older brothers and their friends I always hustled like a paper route or whatever I could. And any way I could get money, these guys would buy me alcohol. So I never had a problem getting alcohol once I started. And yeah, I didn't become a daily drinker, when I was 10 years old. But if you invited me to your house, I would look around, and I was looking for alcohol. I might say, "Hey, do your parents drink, or you want to party, or can we?" And this is anywhere from age 10 to 15. By the time I was 15 years old, I had my first detox that was in Children's Hospital in Buffalo, New York. They didn't have a detox ward there. It was intensive care. They put me there for 8 days. And while I was there detoxing from alcohol and a few other things, my dad's AA buddies would come in every single day and visit me in Children's Hospital. And I knew most of these guys because they'd all been to my house. My dad and his sponsor were really into 12-step work and starting groups and working with people, so our home was always filled with drunks, always. And some of them would be sober 15, 20 years, and some of them were sober 15 or 20 days. So we got to see we got to see them in all different shapes. As a matter of fact, my mom loved to tell the story of my little sister was getting ready for school one day, and apparently the police had dropped somebody off and put him to bed on our sun porch instead of giving him a ticket. And this guy was sitting at the kitchen table and he's drinking a cup of coffee while my sister is trying to get ready for school. And this guy's, he's banged up. He had a bad night and he's, oh, I feel so bad. I'm so ashamed of myself. I am so embarrassed. I can't believe this has happened again. And finally, my little sister looked at this guy and said, we've seen way worse than you. So I think that was a little ego deflation at depth. My mom liked to tell that story, and I think she enjoyed telling that story because it had to be somewhat comical with all the stuff that was going on. And I've shared that it wasn't an uncommon at all for, we had a family of seven. My folks didn't have a lot of money, but I can tell you there was always guests sitting at the dinner table. When we come home from school, there'd be a box of donuts or fig bars or something sitting on the counter, and the coffee'd be on, and there might be two or three alcoholics in the living room sitting there smoking cigarettes, having a little bit of a meeting with my dad or whatever. This was a constant environment that I grew up in. And I always loved AA. The AA people were always good to us. When I was a little kid, they had the parties and the picnics and those type of things. They always would have like group anniversaries. My parents had a big a lot of land, so it wasn't unusual for them to host some of these parties. So we as kids loved it because the AAs would throw money in the sandbox and things like that, and we'd just do that, and so I never had any bad thoughts about AA. And I knew all of the AA guys and ladies that were going to the meeting because they had been to our home. And here I am laying in Children's Hospital, and the AA members are coming in and they're bringing me cigarettes and talking to me and suggesting that when I get out of the hospital that I start coming to AA. And and the medical team there, they were indicating that they really felt that I would benefit from counseling. So we arranged for me to get out, and I started going to counseling. I liked that quite a bit because the counselor and I were smoking weed together. So that was a therapy that I was excited about. And I don't think it was doing anything positive for me, but at least I had something to look forward to. I remember going to my first AA meeting as a person who actually needed AA. Okay. And I go down with my dad. It's on a Friday night. This would have been in 1974 in the fall. Okay. And the reason I knew it was a fall was because school had started, and that's how I ended up in the hospital. And then I got out and we went to this meeting. We go down the stairs. This was in the police station, Orchard Park, New York. They had these long wooden tables and a low ceiling. A lot of the people smoked then. And the room was filled with cigarette smoke. And there were coffee, off to the side. They had a kitchen behind the room. And the big wooden tables, they start going down. Eddie, I'm an alcoholic. David, I'm an alcoholic. Jim, I'm an alcoholic. Dorothy, I'm an alcoholic. And it comes to me, and I'm not sure what the heck to say. I'm just like, I'm Mike, and I'm a problem drinker with alcoholic tendencies. Because I'm 15 years old. I didn't want to be an alcoholic. I didn't understand your language. What I understood was that members of Alcoholics Anonymous were not drinking. And I felt like if I admitted that I was an alcoholic, that somebody would think that I would have to stop drinking forever. And forever just seemed like such a long time. It was incomprehensible to me. I'm 15 years old. I haven't even been on a date yet. I hadn't graduated high school. I had nothing going on. And I'm thinking, I can't drink. I don't. So this alcoholic uh, problem drinker with alcoholic tendencies was as honest as I could get, and they didn't throw me out. They didn't throw me out. They said, keep coming, kid. It's the first drink that gets you drunk. And I would fight with my dad. What do you mean it's the first? You call yourself an alcoholic? First drink that gets you drunk. You're a lightweight. He'd say things to me like, if you were going to get killed by a train and you were on a train track, would it be the engine that kills you or the caboose? Well, I'm a deep thinker. Why am I on the train tracks? I needed an answer to that before I could answer his question. I didn't realize that I had subscribed to the debating society. And I want you to know that I loved AA and AA people. I just couldn't see myself not drinking. And I sat in the meetings and you would share with me your stories, what happened, what it was like. I heard about people losing their kids and losing their jobs and losing their families and losing their lives. I was telling you, we would have meals and there would always be people sitting there. And sometimes there would be somebody there for 3, 4, 5 days in a row, and then they're gone. Never to see them again. And every now and then I'd hear my dad overhear him talking, they lost that one. That guy didn't make it. He hung himself. So we got to see the glory and we got to see the ugliness of alcoholism growing up as kids. And here I am, introduced to the program that saved my dad's life, trying to figure this thing out. And I somehow thought that it was don't drink and go to meetings. So I started following that recipe. And honestly, I don't know where I heard that because that really wasn't what my dad was doing. I mean, his example was he was 12-stepping people and he was picking them up and he was taking them to meetings. He was taking them to service positions. They were going to the jails and doing this kind of stuff. So I knew I should have known AA was more than just stop drinking and go to meetings. And I would go to meetings and a lot of people that I saw really seemed to be happy or reasonably so. And I was miserable. And every time I quit drinking, I would sit in those meetings. I would think about how I could kill myself because I never got better from not drinking. Every time I quit drinking, I got worse. Never did I get better. So I thought there was something different with me. I thought that you guys had something going on that you'd stop drinking and you'd start to be better, and I'd stop drinking, and the insanity and the fear and and all of it would just be so overwhelming, and I would get so depressed and I just hated myself so much for my behaviors that were uncontrolled. And when I say uncontrolled, I'd get up in the morning with great intentions, man. I'd want to do something positive today. I want to help somebody. I want to do something that my parents are going to be proud. I'm going to show up to work, or I'm going to show up to school, or and I never could. I would be drunk and all of it would be off the table. And I would end up back in trouble, needing to get bailed out, back in the hospital, back in the detox center, back in the psychiatric hospital. I remember they were putting me in a psychiatric hospital and the young lady was doing the intake and she's asking me the typical intake questions. And while she's asking me the questions, I'm trying to explain to her that a life with me would be a good move on her part. See, I was always playing an angle. I was always looking for a soft, easy way, wanting a shortcut. And while I was going to those meetings, I want you to know I went from the fall of 1974 until April of 1985, and I came to Alcoholics Anonymous on a regular basis. And I attended not 10 meetings, not 20 meetings, but hundreds and hundreds of meetings over that 11-year period. And I never got 30 days sober. Never. I could not get 30 days sober. My last failed attempt at suicide was on April 21st, 1985. I was going to shoot myself. I broke into this house and I knew the guy was a hunter, and apparently they had the weapons out of the house that weekend, and I couldn't find them. I found myself in the top story of that house, and it was getting to be daylight, and it was very early in the morning. I'm looking out the window, and I'm trying to calculate, if I dive out the window on my head, am I going to kill myself, or am I going to lay there in pain for 3 or 4 hours until somebody finds me? And I didn't want any more pain. I wanted it to stop. I was so sick. I looked out the window and I see three ladies walking down the street wearing church hats. And it reminded me of my grandmother when I was a kid. She would come over to our house after Mass, and her and her friends would be wearing these church hats. And for some reason, I thought of the God that I was introduced to at my childhood. It was the only God I knew at that time. And I got down on my knees because I had nothing left to do. And I just said, God, help me. And the room didn't light up, and I didn't feel any different. I didn't know if there was anyone listening to that. I didn't know if anything was happening. All I know is I was sick. I was dying, and I did not know what to do. I couldn't live and I couldn't die. I was trying to kill myself, and every time I tried, it was unsuccessful. I do not know why. And here I prayed that morning. I got up and somehow I went through that day. I drank all day, and that night I found myself alone in a bar. And in that haze, I picked up the phone and I called the only person left that I thought would answer the phone, and that was my dad. And he said, "Where are you?" And I explained to him where I was, and he agreed to come and meet me. And the next day, he and another member of Alcoholics Anonymous came and did a 12-step call. And they met me in a diner and they bought me a cup of coffee. And we talked about my options, and I didn't have any. I was out of option. I was out of good ideas. It was recommended that I get some medical detox because of the physical condition I was in. So they arranged for me to go to the Erie County Medical Center. I got to the medical center, and the admissions counselor came out in the hallway and put his hands up and said, "You can't come in here. You've been here too many times." So I knew him well, and I was really not happy with that. I felt like the gates of hell had slammed shut on me, and there was nowhere left for me to go. And I walked out of that hospital. Where my brother's truck was parked was a taxi cab. And I got in the cab and I said, "Take me to a bar." And I stood in that bar, and I was having a drink, and that was April 23rd, 1985, and it was a sunny day. It was downtown Buffalo. I'm in a corner bar, and the door was ajar, and a city bus pulled up, and an old lady was trying to get on the bus, and she fell to the ground. And for some reason, I walked out of that bar, and I helped lift her up and get her on the bus, and I followed her on the bus, and I've never had to go back for that drink. Now, I believe the magic of Alcoholics Anonymous happened to me at that moment. You see, because those 11 years, I heard the conversation about giving without expectation, things like that, but I didn't understand that. See, I know Alcoholics Anonymous is a program of service. It's a program where we give without expectation of return. And you see, what happened to me that day was I went out and I didn't kick that lady. I didn't grab her purse and I didn't run. I helped her. Wasn't looking for anything. I'm gonna I'm gonna stop there for a second. I'm gonna fast forward about 20, 21 years. Okay. Maybe wait a minute, 85. Yeah, 25. We'll just say 25 years. I was given the opportunity to do some writing. And I've been a great historian studying the history of Alcoholics Anonymous and the key players and the early pioneers. The recordings that you see that are behind me, we have had the privilege of having put together, I want to say, preserve the history of Alcoholics Anonymous on tapes. So we have what is the largest tape library, and it's got all of the early AA pioneers on it. We've been digitizing those and making them available through our nonprofit. which is a 501c3. And if anybody's interested in learning more about that, you can get my email and shoot me an email. But I wanted to share that because as I was doing the work that I started to do, I was given the opportunity to start writing a couple of books. And while I was doing research on some of the books that I was writing, I'm not a writer, okay? Like I'm just a drunk. And I didn't have much of an education, but I learned how to say yes. Anyway, I was studying Bill Wilson's life, and I've been so fascinated by Bill Wilson and the decisions that he has made in his life and the writing that he has done and the love that he had and the humility that he had. But the thing that I was probably most excited about, if you will, would have been Bill's spiritual experience that he had in Towns Hospital. And for those of you that don't know, Bill Wilson was a co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he got sober on December the 11th of 1934. After several visits to the hospital, he found himself back in the hospital. And the gentleman that introduced him to the concept of not drinking and to this program of the Oxford group came to visit him one morning. His name was Ebby. And Ebby stood in the doorway, and Bill said he woke up and he saw Ebby in the doorway. And he said the first thought that came to his mind was that this guy should be out looking for a job. 1934, they were still recovering from the Great Depression and they were just digging out of it. And I can understand how Bill would say that. And he said, Ebby, come on in here. And Bill later said Ebby was a man who was practicing what he preached. And Bill looked at Ebby and said, Ebby, what was that simple little formula that you shared with me a few weeks ago at my home? And Ebby said, you got to be completely deflated. You got to be licked. You got to be done. You got to be willing to believe in some sort of God, even if you just try it as an experiment, Bill, anything but something greater than yourself, some sort of God. You have to be willing to write down all the stuff that you've done and who you've done it to, and then share that with someone. So there's our confession. And then we pay restitution for those people that we hurt, the things that we did wrong. We go out and we make right those wrongs when we can, Bill. And then the last part of it is we just share this with another person. And then Ebby left the room. Bill said he sunk into the deepest depression he'd ever been in his life. This man suffered terribly from depression. He said in the depth of that depression, he hollered out like a child, if there's a God, show himself. And he said the whole room lit up a bright white light. He felt as though he was on the top of a mountain and he could feel the breeze of the Spirit blowing through him. He had been released. And I was like looking at my life going, I didn't have any kind of cool spiritual experience. Man, how come, here I got sobriety and I didn't. And I went back and I started looking at things a little differently. And I saw that day that I didn't kick that lady. And then I saw the day before when I knelt down by myself in that room and said a prayer to the God of my childhood and said, God, help me. I don't want to drink anymore. I don't want to live this way. And then I meet that lady and I help her on the bus. And I realized I had a profound spiritual experience that moment. I just missed it. And it wasn't until many years later when I was doing an inventory that I was able to see that. And I share that because I hope that if anybody is out there and they're real busy with their recovery, pay attention to the things that are happening in your life because sometimes we miss some of this stuff. And it's absolutely incredible. Well, they didn't know what the heck to do with me. So my dad called one of his AA friends This guy lived in Texas, and back then you actually had to pick up a phone and call and then hope someone would answer it. Okay. Well, this particular day, Big John was home and he answered the phone, and my dad said, John, I got Mike here and I don't know what to do with him. And John said, well, send him down here for a couple weeks. We'll see if he wants the deal. John always called AA the deal. And if you're new, I want you to know that AA is the deal. Okay. Anyway, he says, send the kid down here for a couple weeks. We'll see if he wants the deal. Well, all right. So I arrive in Texas. They fly me down. They pick me up in Abilene. John lived in Brownwood, Texas. Well, he actually lived in Bangs, Texas. But Brownwood was the community there. And that's where we went to meetings, and that's where his friends were. That night, we got back from a meeting after they had picked me up, and I'm in John's one-bedroom apartment. And John was a big man. He was a amateur boxer in college. He was an attorney. He was a big guy. He was over 6 foot tall. He got sober October the 28th of 1951. His sponsor was a guy named Dick Breen, and Dick got sober in September of 41, and Dick's sponsor was Bill Wilson. John, having the background that he had plenty of opportunities to meet with Bill, spend time with Bill, and spend time with other pioneers and early members. When I got there, I thought I knew everything about AA. And I remember the first night John says, how long you been around the deal, kid? And with as much ego as you can have when you weigh 90 pounds, which is what I weighed, I'd been coming to AA for 10 years, and everything I owned fit in a cardboard box. I looked up at John and I said, oh, about 10 years. And he said, I don't know if you have the guts it takes to make it, but we can show you by living proof how you never have to live this way again. And if you want to quit drinking, I'll go to hell and back with you. And if you don't, you can go to hell alone. And I was like waiting for Welcome to Texas. This guy's taking a strong hand with me. And then he says to me, you were nothing but a thief. Maybe not the kind of thief that'd kick in a joint. You were worse than that. And not the kind of guy that'd steal from your mother's purse. We know all about that. And he says, no, you were worse than that because you stole from those you loved the most their right to happiness. I'm going to repeat that. He said to me that I had become a thief of the worst kind because I was stealing from those that I love the most their right to happiness. John was the first one. You know, I kind of look at Ebby talking to Bill in the hospital room of Ebby entered the cave. Okay. Big John entered the cave when he said that. I was wrapped in a blanket of despair and hopelessness. I was 90 pounds and I was sick, and I had been to enough AA meetings that I absolutely knew it wouldn't work for me. And this guy says, you're nothing but a damn thief. But he didn't look down at me. He said, kid, I'm the same way. You see, this is a common problem and a common solution. He met me where I was and he began to lead me out to the sunlight of the Spirit one step at a time. And we began to do that in the book Alcoholics Anonymous and in the 12 and 12. His best friend was a guy named Bill O'Neill, and Bill lived in Brownwood, Texas, and Bill had the Midwest Tape Library. And in 1953, he started recording conferences, and when he died in 1999, he had amassed over 3,500 reel-to-reels. And what a servant. Just incredible. And I remember going there, like my first time. These guys, Bill got sober October 21 of 1951, and John got sober October 28th. So Bill had 1 week on John, and he never let him forget it. These guys gave me so much love, though. Every day we would go over to Bill's house, and Bill would make me cassette tapes of the recording. He would give me a box of tapes, and I would listen to those tapes. And when I'm done, I would bring them back. And he'd say, "No, you don't have to bring them back, kid. Find somebody else to give them to." Okay. And then he'd give me more. And that was kind of how I started to learn Alcoholics Anonymous. And John was speaking at conferences all over the place. And he didn't have the money for the kid to fly, so he'd tell the committee, I don't like to fly. I got the kid here and he likes to drive. So if I'll be happy to come, but the kid and I are going to drive. And he'd get off the phone. He'd say, well, kid, we're going to Saskatchewan. We're going to Toronto. We're going to Phoenix. We're going to Los Angeles. So we would travel and I would drive for him. And while I'm driving for him, he would be reading to me from AA Comes of Age, the big book, the 12 and 12, and as Bill sees it. Okay. And we would be listening to tapes and reading and listening to tapes. And then he'd be quizzing me. Hey, what's Dr. Bob's address? And it's like he was seeing if I could retain any of this. And it started to become fun for me. I started to enjoy this whole thing. In the beginning, I hated it. Okay. But as I was doing these things and he's bringing me around, and I mentioned to you that they invited me for 2 weeks. He had a 1-bedroom apartment. He gave me the bedroom. I stayed for 2 years. You see, I share that not to tell you how great John Carlton is. I share that to show you that people had to sacrifice so that I could be sober. It is my responsibility to be able to sacrifice what I need so that someone else can get sober. My God, if I'm invited to speak at a talk at 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon and my grandson's going to celebrate his 10th birthday party today, I'm going to be at the birthday party, but I'm also going to be at the talk. And I asked them, I said, could you make that birthday party a little later? I'd really like to be there. On Wednesday, I'll be going to New Orleans. I'm doing a retreat down in New Orleans this coming weekend. And after that, I don't know where I'm going to Hawaii. I got some fun stuff. But, the other thing is if I get a phone call right now, Mike, there's a guy across town that needs a ride to a meeting. He's new. And he's sick, and he's having a tough time. And somehow that call comes to me. Joy, I got to go on this. I got to go do this. You see, this is the life that we get to live, and we get to live this way today. It's not we got to live this way. We get to live. This is a privilege to be able to do the work and the things that I get to do in sobriety. And when I came in, I hated everybody. And Big John would give me assignments. Tonight, I want you to stand at the door and greet people when they come to the meeting. There was a clubhouse. It was called the Brown Tower. And I'd stand there, but I was not happy. He'd say, tell people that you're glad to see them. And I would think, no, I'm not. I'm not glad to see him. I'm not happy that I'm stuck in this hellhole with an 80-year-old. Okay. I mean, I was just miserable. I'd wake up in the morning, come out of his bedroom. Okay. Out of his bedroom. I didn't know where he slept and I could care less. And he'd be sitting in the chair, maybe smoking a cigar. And I'd go, I hope you die from choking on that. And he'd go, kid, I think you're getting a little better. He let me get all that poison, all that crap out of me. He'd give me assignments at the club. He'd say, kid, tonight you're going to be a door greeter. When people get here, I want you to tell them that you're glad that you see them. I'd go and I would stand there. And people would come in and then finally one day, this old guy comes in, AJ. And AJ had silver hair and a dark tan and the whitest teeth I don't know if it was because his complexion was dark because of the tan or if this guy had teeth that took up his entire face. I don't think I've ever seen anybody who's had a smile any bigger than AJ. And I said, AJ, how are you? And he says, fantastic. And he opened his mouth up ear to ear, and all I could see was teeth. And I looked at him, and the first thought that went through my head was, this guy's got to be on pills. And then I said, do you really mean that? And AJ looked at me and he smiled again and he said, and it just keeps getting better. Well, at that point in my life, I wasn't able to smile because my teeth were all rotted and I was too embarrassed. But I went back to John's little apartment that night, and I had begun to start a discipline that I still have today of doing a daily review, looking and checking and seeing how did you do today, Mike? Were you kind to people? Did you reach out to somebody? Did you compliment somebody today? Did you lift people up? Or were you a whiny brat? So I began to ask myself, how am I gonna treat people? And I got AJ, and I thought, man, I'm gonna try to be more like AJ. And I'm back at the door greeting job, and now people are coming in, they're like, I'm like excited, like, hey, glad you're here. How are you? And they go, how you doing, Mike? And I say, I'm doing good, getting better. And then I go home and I go, I am such a liar because I didn't believe I was doing good. I still felt like a dirtbag. I felt like a thief. I felt like a loser. I felt like somebody was about to jump off a cliff. I felt like I was never going to get sober and I was different than all you guys. And I'd ruined my life and I'd ruined my past and I'd ruined my future. It was over, man. That's how I felt. But yet these guys are coming in. I'm saying I'm doing good and it's getting better. Now somebody would say, well, Mike, you had a lot of trauma and you had a lot of shit to work through. And that's why you were, no, I had a bad attitude is what I had. I needed to change my thinking. So I started to change what I was doing. People would come in and say, I'm doing good. And guess what? It wasn't long and I was doing good. So what was happening was I was I was only stating the facts a little ahead of time. Okay. The reality was, I just didn't know I was doing good. And then eventually I saw it. And most of the people that I was around in the clubhouses and the meetings, they were saying, hey, kid, you're doing good. And I began to put a little weight on and get a little healthy. Yeah, I was sober over 2 years, and John and I were still traveling. And then I said to him, I met a friend of my dad's in Arizona, and I said, hey, I want to go to Arizona. And this guy offered me a job and a place to live. And John's like, good, kid. I think that's a great opportunity for you. So I moved to Arizona and I was doing a job as a laborer for a construction company in August in Arizona, outdoors at temperatures well over 100 degrees. I was a twig and I'm carrying this stuff. And anyway, I had a day off and I was out by the pool on this particular day. And this girl came out and dove in the water. And I dove in after her. And swam up to her and said, hi, I'm Mike and I'm an alcoholic. And she said, I'm Joy and I'm a school teacher. And I thought I need more joy in my life. And I asked her out on a date. And anyway, we ended up going out on a date. And she was there visiting her mom and dad. She's a school teacher from Michigan. And her fortune cookie read something like, you can trust the man you're with, his love is true. 4 months later, we were married. And this December, that'll be 38 years. Now, I want you to know when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, all my relationships could be summed up in one word, and that was pathetic. Because they were all one sided. They were all me taking from you. That was what a relationship was. It was me taking from you. Whether you wanted it or not, I was taking it. Well, I have been so blessed. I mentioned my first sponsor, Big John, and his sponsor, Dick Breen. His sponsor, Dick, closed a talk one time, and I got to hear it on one of those cassette tapes back in 1986. And ever since I have heard that talk, I've tried to close my talks the same way. And before I go there, Dr. Bob said if you simmer Alcoholics Anonymous down to just two things, those two things would be love and service. I really believe that if you simmered it down to one thing, that one thing would be love, because service is love in action. But the way Dick closed the meeting was, a bell is not a bell until we ring it. A song is not a song until we sing it. Love wasn't put in our hearts to stay. Love is only love when we give it away. AA to me is only AA when we give it away. Thanks for having me today.